Coming up on KCCI 8 News Close Up, we sit down with Governor Kim Reynolds to talk about our water.
We want to do everything we can to make sure that we're driving water quality.
Our conversation about what's in Iowans' drinking water as Central Iowans' lawn watering ban remains. We asked the governor about how the state can improve this situation. Vetoing a controversial eminent domain bill. I talk with her about that decision and the governor's response to Iowans who still want action to protect their property rights. Plus, a look at what's ahead for Reynolds' final legislative session. Hear what the governor hopes to tackle in 2026.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. I'm Chief Political Reporter Amanda Rooker. Thousands of properties across parts of Central Iowa are still under a mandatory lawn watering ban. Central Iowa Waterworks continues to urge customers to conserve water to help lower the nitrate levels in the drinking water sources. I asked Governor Kim Reynolds about our water quality and what the state can do to improve the situation. Well, Governor, thank you so much for making time to chat. We really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Well, I want to start today talking about water quality.
Sure.
2 weeks ago, Central Iowa Waterworks issued its first ever lawn watering ban for its roughly 600,000 customers. And they cited high nitrate levels in the Des Moines and Raccoon rivers. When that ban went into effect, your office said that the Department of Natural Resources was monitoring the situation. What's come out of that?
Well, we've actually met with both Central Iowa Waterworks and Des Moines Waterworks, so we've sat down and had a conversation with them. We're working on maybe an opportunity to help us remove some of the salt or the nitrate that comes out when they're filtering the system. That's kind of slowing down the process just a little bit. So we're looking at a couple different things that we may be able to do to help the process move forward. You know, it's Iowa, Mother Nature. We have extremely dry weather, no rain, and then we get deluged with rain. And so we're just seeing some of the outcomes from some of that. But, you know, the DNR is monitoring it. I think Central Iowa Works has said it's still safe to drink. It's very regulated, and so everybody will continue to monitor it and make sure that we're, you know, doing everything we can to help alleviate and help them move through the process. You know, the other thing I think that gets lost sometimes is, you know, we've been working on this for a long time. We're an ag state. Of course, we feed, you know, the world. We provide 10% of the nation's food. But, you know, we put a lot of money into water quality as well. I think since I took office, we've put over $700 million into water quality efforts. Our farmers are doing more with wetlands and with cover crops and with various conservation practices, as well as precision farming, that we continue to get better on about the amount of nitrate that we put on each plant, because there's a cost to that as well. So, you know, we'll continue the conservation practices. We'll continue to make it a priority as we have throughout my administration, and we'll continue to look for just innovative ways that we can help make sure that we have the water quality that Iowans deserve.
Yeah, when you first took office, I think you said at the time the first bill you wanted on your desk was water quality legislation. I don't know if that happened, but I know you signed in 2018, right?
Right. It was the very first bill that I signed as governor of the state of Iowa, and I worked extensively over the interim. Governor Branstad had worked with that. We weren't able to get it through the legislative session, and we were at the very beginning. And what that did is it set up a dedicated and growing revenue source for water quality. So the nutrient reduction strategy that Secretary Nag has put in place, and he works extensively with our farmers and with and honestly, we have to be careful just even with some of the large manufacturers and some of the malls that we have. All of that tends to, you know, provide some runoff, not necessarily the nitrate, but all of that impacts water quality and how we continue to make sure that we're doing everything we can to address that, as well as soil health.
Are we doing enough fast enough? When you look at what you put in place back then, nearly a decade ago, and then, you know, flash forward and we're still dealing with a lot of these issues, because these things, they take time and they cost a lot of money. Does the state need to do more heavy-handed to put requirements in place so it's not voluntary?
Yeah, no, I don't think that's never the answer, really. We try to stay away from that as much as we can, but we have made progress. And I think you'll have to check with Secretary Nag's office to get the specific details, or I can have my office follow up. But the last time they actually measured this, it had gone down. So, you know, we're so at the, Mother Nature has a big impact on how this impacts the system. And so we just need to make sure that, like Des Moines Waterworks and Central Waterworks, they have the tools that they need to remove it in a timely manner so that we can ensure that we still have safe drinking water for Iowa consumers. And so that's a partnership that we're going to continue to work on with them. So, you know, innovation is changing every day. I can't believe the changes that we've seen, that the number of farmers that I've said that have increased using cover crops and just conservation methods to really make their farming practices better. And so they're doing it every single day, and you know the rate of innovation. I mean, we're going to continue to see that happening. So I think honestly that's where we can be way more effective, as long as we support that kind of research and that kind of technology, and we continue to work with our farmers and our communities to make sure that we're really looking at it from a watershed perspective, and really hopefully getting the results that we're looking for.
I also asked the governor about public health concerns. Our conversation continues after the break. A report that was commissioned by the Polk County Board of Supervisors recently found that nearly 80% of the nitrates that are in the Des Moines and Raccoon River are directly tied to agriculture. And this is the first time that we're seeing a lawn watering ban. So there is, you know, a problem that is continuing to occur. Now, obviously agriculture, as you mentioned, it's foundational to our state. It's foundational to our economy. So how do you balance protecting that sector and encouraging innovation in that sector?
Well, we are doing it.
But it is a problem that's continuing potentially to get worse, is it
Well,
not?
but I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, it ebbs and flows. By a lot of it has to do with weather, as I just said. So we have a report that they did not that long ago that said that it actually was going down. So we were having some positive impact from that. So as I said, you continue to fund innovation and technology, and look for ways that we can work with our water system, like Des Moines Waterworks and Central Iowa Waterworks, to make sure that they have the equipment and the system that they need. So when we see that uptick, right now what's slowing them down is the removal of that salt. Mm-hmm. So that's really slowing the process down. So if we can figure out some way to help address that, then they can turn that system quicker, and we might not see some of the requests that we're seeing, like not watering the lawn. But that had a significant impact. Really, just doing that was able to bring it down quite quickly. So we're going to continue to look at all of that, and it's just, you know, providing resources, looking at how we can feed a growing world population. We have an obligation to do that too. But I will tell you, there is a cost to those inputs, and so farmers are not being extravagant. They're not overusing. They're putting on the least amount that they can to be able to grow the crops and get the bushels that they're aiming for, but they're also doing it in a responsible manner. They're doing all of the conservation practices that I laid out, and if there's new things that we can do, we'll continue to work with them and help drive and encourage those practices to take place.
Is the state tracking how much animal waste is being put on the land?
That's a question for Secretary Neg.
But do you think the state should be tracking that? When we're seeing studies that say nitrates are directly tied to agriculture, should we be tracking that?
It's also a good use of it when you drill it in. So there's different ways that we can handle that. So I'm sure that they are in some manner, but you know, we're an agriculture state and we want to do everything we can to make sure that we're driving water quality. Everybody is working on it. Secretary Naig, Secretary Northey, I mean, that was one of his key components, was to set up the nutrient reduction strategy. And that whole goal was to do everything we can to reduce the nitrates. So we're going to continue to work on it and we're going to continue to measure it. I do agree with, looking, I mean, that helps us be informed on what we need to do or maybe how we can apply different innovative methods to address it. So, there's a lot of different things that we can continue to work on.
Yeah, I also want to know what your message is to Iowans who may be concerned about public health. Central Iowa Water Works is saying it's safe to drink.
Yeah, so we have to start there. Yeah. These things are regulated. It's not like a do whatever you want in these facilities. These are heavily regulated. And if we have the industry that's monitoring the water and they're telling Iowans that it's safe to drink, then it's safe to drink. So, but as I said, we've met with them, we'll work with them. The DNR is monitoring, Secretary Naig is monitoring. So we're all working on it. We're not ignoring it, but it was going down. So we'll continue to monitor it and see what else we can do to address it. Otherwise, I think, Iowans are astute. They, if we have to maybe not water the lawn for a couple days to help address some of the nitrate issues, then we'll do that, get through it, and then we'll see if we can find some alternatives to the backup with what they're pulling out of the water so that we can help them keep up with that, and hopefully we'll remove some of those watering bans that have been in place. But if they tell us it's okay, then it's okay.
I ask just because some Iowans are looking at some of the emerging research, peer-reviewed studies that link levels of nitrate below 10 milligrams per liter to an increased risk of cancer. The EPA is looking at that. But what do you say to Iowans who are concerned that there may be risks?
I think we have to be careful. Science changes so frequently. I mean, we need to do the research. We'll see what they find out. We'll dig into it. I put some money into a pilot program with the University of Iowa to start to look at some of these things, but let's look at obesity, let's look at alcohol. If you remember, one of the outcomes from a study was alcohol consumption was one of the biggest drivers of cancer. And so what do? Take that off the shelves? So we have to be thoughtful about the research that comes out. We need to consume that and then start to see what changes need to be made or what can we do to address it. So if we need to do some different things, we'll compile the different studies that have been done and kind of see what that result looks like. But that's why I wanted to partner with the University of Iowa, because they have the expertise to help us do that and help us figure out what direction we need to go in, or where do we need to maybe put some additional funding in. So maybe it is some more studies to some of the concerns that you just raised. I'm not saying no to any of those things. We're trying to address that. We're trying to figure it out. And in the meantime, just like we did, during COVID, I mean, a lot of different findings on what was good and what was bad, and you have to sift through both of those to hopefully get to some consensus where you can start to provide some solutions on how we start to address some of the concerns that they may have. So I'm not minimizing it. I don't mean to do that, but there's a lot of different things that we need to look at. We recognize that, and that's why I made that a priority, and we did the partnership with the University of Iowa. So maybe we'll have some more answers. They report back to us within a year. So hopefully we can have a longer conversation next year when we have some of the information that they'll provide on the partnership.
Still to come on Close Up, I talk with the governor about why she vetoed a bill that would have put restrictions on eminent domain and whether she'll take action on the issue next year. We'll be right back. I want to talk about the issue of eminent domain.
Sure.
That was something the last time that we talked. You were weighing the conversation, listening to both sides. You ended up deciding to veto House File 639. And you put out a letter, explaining your thought process there. Some of the concerns that you raised, insurance requirements, the 25-year permit limit, some unintended consequences you thought the bill may have on energy sectors like oil and gas. Is there a different way that the bill could have been written where it would have earned your signature?
Well, I'm not going to speak on hypotheticals, but that's the process that we're going to go through, and that's really the legislative process and how that takes place. So, there's supporters. There's passionate supporters on both sides of the issue. And once that bill passed both chambers and was sent to my desk, I think we talked about this last time, I spent the entire 30 days meeting with stakeholders from every side of the issue, really trying to dig in and understand if it meant what we were trying, if it accomplished what we were trying to do. And it wasn't just about eminent domain, it went way beyond that, and it did have unintended consequences. And even as I talked to property owners, they said, well, this isn't really the bill that we had wanted, but this is what we got, and so we have to support it, So, when I talk about a Sire, that's an ethanol plant in Potawatomi County that is hooking up to a CO2 pipeline that has invested millions of dollars that used absolutely no eminent domain whatsoever, it shut them down. It has unintended consequences when it comes to not just CO2, but oil and anhydrous and natural gas and transmission lines. The intervenor language and the insurance impacted some of that. There was a lot of concerns about the safety, and so when another conversation that I had with the property owners asked me to reach out to PHMSA, which is under the DOT, which regulates 3.3 million miles of pipeline across this country, and CO2 is a part of that. They regulate it, and they said, check with them. They'll talk about how it's not safe. And so we did. I had a phone call and actually sent a letter and asked for information. And what the response was back from them is that it's highly regulated. It's one of the safest pipelines out there. It has a very good history for the decades that it's been in use. And so just some of those things that we were able to review was part of the reason that I made the decision to ultimately veto it, and we'll continue to look for opportunities to. And probably the biggest thing that I had a concern with, those three things weighed into it, but the other thing is it didn't deal with the process, and that's part of the problem. The process that we have right now for putting pipe and infrastructure into the ground, it's very limited on how you can potentially not utilize eminent domain by maybe going around a property owner that doesn't want it. And so it didn't address that. It didn't address land restoration. And we really have a lot of good ideas on how we can start to change the process to make eminent domain fair, rare, and really thoughtful in how we use it. And it really didn't address that at all. So it's going to continue to be a conversation. It's going to continue to be a topic in the legislature, and hopefully we can figure out a compromise and address some of the concerns that I saw when I reviewed the bill.
Is it something that you want to offer legislation on next session?
We'll look at it. Can be a part of that conversation. I'd be happy to be a part of that conversation. And I would specifically maybe start with some of the areas that I just laid out. So we'll see where that goes. There doesn't seem to be a lot of willingness right now. We'll see what happens with a lot of the statements and comments that have been made. I think, adults can agree to disagree and have a difference of opinion, but from some of the comments that have been made, I think they've gone, a little bit far in trying to, address a difference of opinion.
Yeah. Do you want to respond to any of those? There have been some House Republican lawmakers that have been frustrated and have said that maybe next session this may change how they react to your priorities. Have you talked to them about that?
Yeah, it's okay to be frustrated. I make decisions every single day that half the people don't agree with. I went through COVID. I had educators sending me letters with describing their obituary. So I make tough decisions every day that people don't agree with. But I think it's, well, first of all, it was sexist. Bobby Kaufman's remarks that I was an errand girl was sexist, unprofessional, and really childish. And I think it's reflective of the theater that he operates in. I think there's a way to make your point without really undercutting just really the respect of the office. I don't care who's in office as a governor. I think that was uncalled for, and I think it's not helpful. It was out of line, and I think if you want to sit down and you want to have a conversation and you want to move forward and get to some consensus, I don't think you start with a rant, a childish rant on social media calling the governor of the state of Iowa a errand girl. I find that disheartening and unfortunate.
But you're willing to move past that and look to the issue,
well,
move past the criticism.
I'm always trying to find answers to finding solutions to what we're trying to work on. So yeah, we'll be working on that.
Our conversation with the governor continues when we come back. Stay with us. What are some of the other things you want to work on next session?
Well, property tax. So we've already started. We've sat down with my team, and this will be hopefully a comprehensive review. It won't be easy. It never has been easy. That's why we haven't been successful in really getting comprehensive property tax reform done. So we're starting now, and we're really going to dig in, and everything is on the table. And looking forward to just, I guess, trying to figure out how we can deliver the services to Iowans, but do it in a different manner, kind of like we've done at the state level. I think we've led by example. So I think, Iowans are gonna have to make a decision if they want their property taxes reduced. We're gonna have to be willing and open to looking at different ways for delivering those services. We've also stood up DOGE, and I think they'll have some recommendations. One of the areas we asked them to look at was the return on investment for government, and so I'll be anxious to see kind of what some of their recommendations are as well. But that'll probably be, and then a lot of things feed into that as well, but that'll probably be the biggest piece of legislation that we'll be looking at next year.
Is part of it thinking through, okay, this is my final legislative session, what are the top things that I want my legacy to be in the state?
Well, I just don't think of it as a from. I mean, I really don't. Yeah. I think people find that hard to believe, but that's just not how I've approached things. I love policy. I love working on things that make processes better. And that's really what drives me in government's a rich target environment for that. So, I'm working with my team and my cabinet and just making sure that we don't have things that aren't finished, that I can tie up and really get the agencies in a really good place to hand the state over to the next, I'm going to say Republican governor, to the next Republican governor, but to hand it over to them and just watch whoever the next governor is really take the state and take it to the next level. And really, that's my hope, and that's what I want to see. So it'll be a lot of internal stuff, but if we can get something done with property tax, that's probably the one thing that's left. We'll see what's happening with the economy. If we can bring those individual income tax rates down just a little bit more, if we can do that, I'm going to take a look at it. I just want to make sure that I'm fiscally responsible when I do that, and so I don't, they don't end up having to raise taxes in the end. So if it's doable, we'll take a look at it, and then just maybe a couple other pieces of legislation that I'll save for the next interview.
Well, Governor, thank you so much for making time to chat today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. We'll see you back here next Sunday. Have a great day.